In 1967, a group of us met in Saigon. We were having it was just a general meeting. We had not thought of any major protest or anything like that, but we were meeting. And then several people, I remember Dave Gettleson, who was actually killed in the war, but raising the point, what are we doing here? Are we being helpful? So what we talked about was, how do we get the message across that things here are not going well for the Vietnamese, and there are certain questions that we really need to ask. We did not see our protest as a way of getting the U.S. out of Vietnam. We didn't even talk about that. What we talked about was, there are certain things that would make things a lot easier for the Vietnamese, the people that we work with. One of them was to stop the defoliation. Another was stop moving people off their farms and into what were called strategic hamlets. A third one was to sit down and negotiate and talk with the National Liberation Front. And our plan was that we would write these things down and justify them, and we were going to do this as a letter to President Johnson, hoping that it would help him understand what was going on. But we were afraid we didn't have the ability to get a letter to President Johnson. So we said, well, the best way to do that is to get an ad in the New York Times. So we thought each of us could put $5 in. Remember, we were at $60 a month, so that's about what we could afford. And that it would run in the Times, and that the president would read the paper. And so we went over and saw Bernie Weinreb, who was a New York Times reporter. And we said, we'd like to buy an ad, a full-page ad in the New York Times. And he was delighted. He thought, well, that's good. That'll help my cause, with the New York Times. So we wrote the letter, and we foolishly didn't ask Bernie, how much it would cost. So, 3 days later, whatever, we went over to his office with our letter to the New York Times. And it turns out, I forgot how much it was going to cost, but it was like thousands of dollars. It was an awful lot of money. So then he said, well, let me write an article about this. And so we said, well, we want to take this to the ambassador first, because we want him to know maybe he can change policies. So we went to see Ambassador Bunker and said, we think that it would be great, for America and for the Vietnamese if you would stop defoliating, stop making refugees, and negotiate with the other side. And he was very upset that we would think this, and he was even more upset that we were going to give this letter, to the New York Times. He said this would be very impolite. You are guests of the country of Vietnam, so you should go home to America, and then I'll make sure you get to see President Johnson. So anyway, we didn't believe him, and so Bernie Weinreb said he would write this article, which he did, about stop. Oh, and stop bombing. I forgot. We didn't feel that bombing. The U.S. thought, I think, that bombing the North would strengthen our position in the South. At least that's what U.S. officials told me, that one of the reasons it was not only to make the North Vietnamese feel that they couldn't win the war, it was also to strengthen our position in the South. And of course, we knew, particularly the North Vietnamese refugees, who was the basis of U.S. support in the South, were very upset by the bombing because it was bombing their relatives. So anyway, the New York Times printed a front page article about our protests, and then other agencies in Vietnam, started raising the same questions. So I think became clear here in this country that that if for those people doing humanitarian work in Vietnam, the war made no sense, it was counterproductive, and we would never win it.